¿Cuándo fue la última vez you're walking down the street, one of those hot summer afternoons, y de repente you get that scent of fresh cut mango con limoncito and sprinkle of chile? Y de repente you're like a kid again, going out and through the pavimento, chasing down the frutero. You know, that guy with that colorful cart full of fruits from all over the world. Or better yet, you're taking a stroll in your vecindad, and the smell of carbon that is just about to catch fire to light up gives you this perfuming scent that promises that long Sunday afternoon full of laughter and a good carne asada. And yeah, I'm talking about that backyard barbecue, ones where La Familia and toda la vecindad just comes out and fills up your space, the alegría. And everyone is there not because it's gourmet, not because it's algo fancy. It's because it brings joy, soul, o sea, alma. And all of this is tangled up into the moment, the sense of place or topophilia. And it's something that we just can't forget. It's hard to separate. You know, some will call this food memory, but it's actually more than that. It's not just a feeling. Anthropologa Linda Watts mentions how food is more than just a living memory. Food shapes our identity, nuestra salud, y nuestra comunidad. So in today's ramble, it's not just about feeling. Nos vamos a una jornada where we blend sabor with science and storytelling to reconnect us with that sense of wellness and wisdom that you can't buy in that supplement aisle at the grocery store. Porque this is something that you inherit, that you live, and that you pass on. So growing up in a Hispanic household, you know, in your casa, they never used those fancy terms, nutrient dense meal. No saben that modern wellness speak talk. Pero con certidumbre that came from generations after generations, there's been this knowledge that un buen caldo is always a great remedy to heal a broken heart, broken leg, cruda, be real, or even la maldita gripa. Cultural dishes haven't just been tasty, they've been intuitive, this form of culinary medicine. So recuerdo una vez, you know, one of those times where you're really under the weather, one of those give you this like deep exhaustion, ese cansancio that no amount of vaporub doing the trick. So mi jefa showed up on this simple caldito de pollo. It looked just like pale water. First, I was like, esta madre, what is this? Pero after adding toque de limón, some fresh habanero picadito, pouring it into a taza. After that first sip, it was rich, caliente hasta la madre, and steaming. But it instantly cleared up those sinuses, that congestion, and even stopped those mocos from continuing to drip down my nose. Yeah, recuerdo that it was the first time I felt how food has this powerful healing and nourishing. Y todo from just a simple mug of caldito de pollo. So traditional food and ancient food is what I call this medicina con sabor. And I think that's more about what I'm talking about today. This isn't just this nostalgia, this sense of place or topophilia. Today, la ciencia is catching up to what our elders, nuestros antepasados, always knew. Cultural anthropology reminds us that cultural foods have this encoded wisdom, sabiduría, about seasonal eating and how that promotes gut health, salud, and that positive emotional well-being and mental health that many struggle with today. Let's dive into that one a little bit more. ¿Qué quiero decir con eso? Well, if you look at food across the world, different cultures share something in common, and that is the food that heals. If we want to promote our gut health, o sea, que no nos duele la barriga todos los días, we need to give ourselves some fermented foods, those probiotics. You know, in la India, you have what they call dosas, es crepa, pero con harina fermentada. Ahora sí, nos vamos a Latinoamérica, nos vamos a México. What's a better representation than el nixtamal, that corn that's been treated with calcium carbonate? A traditional way or an ancient way to allow for the nutrients out of the corn to be released. So It's a chemical reaction, niacin, amino acids, making that corn actually nutritious, not just calories. Diets from the Mediterranean, year over year, han sido scientifically proven that they reduce that inflammation caused by stress. They make you feel better and protect your heart. Actually reduce that risk of cardiovascular disease. And one of the things that many of us today, we just suffer from stress that leads to chronic inflammation, that leads to that barriga that won't stop growling or giving you the cramps. So, well, we keep talking about ethnic foods or cultural foods. I think one thing that we need to remember is that our ancient tried and true traditions have always been functional with purpose. O sea, functional foods. And when someone says esa alimentación te cura or helps make you feel better, it's like a natural remedy. It's not a joke. We look at century over century trial and error, and even today, how modern science are going back to the traditional roots of food. And it all comes back to that first sip of that pale caldito in a mug, or esa tortilla recién hecha. Essentially, simple cultural traditions has been and will continue to be our own best remedy. So I guess when we talk about functional food or simple food, going back to the roots of the way of our ancestors, como cocinaban, how they harvested food, what happened? Well, how did we go from haciendo un caldo or stock that took hours to going for ese vasito de cup of noodles, Campbell's that you heat and serve in 30 segundos, pero it still says it's homemade and authentic. But yet, how did we go from that? From hecho en casa to basically cut out of a bag? Well, two words come to mind: colonization and industrialization. And those things combined have led us to this disruption of the food systems we used to know and we used to rely on. So here's an example. Now, talk about those ancient crops, common grains back in the day that are now these so-called superfoods, like amaranth that you find here in the Americas, millet that you find in countries around Africa. Those have been pushed aside, but yet they've been some of the most nutrient dense ingredients that we can consume today. Why were they traded out? Well, people need to make cash, dinero, right? And things need to be made faster, easier. With trigo, like sugar. The two things that we probably consume the most of. Those have been the easiest way to monopolize and control these traditional practices, eliminating that need for foraging our own greens, growing our own things, picking our own food. These common practices and simple practices have now all of a sudden been labeled as primitive. Like we said, a lo pobre. You need to grow your own food. Half the time is because you can't afford it, or at least that's what it's called. So más bien dicho, today's convenience, today's systems have made things, yes, fácil, faster, convenient. Is it easier to just grab that bag of the takis, or hay que pelar la jícama, or that fresh papaya? Who has time for that? La cosa is, what are these so-called conveniences come with? What are the consequences? What are the costs? Well, our health. Many ethnic communities, just like Latin American communities, more and more suffer from those, lo que le dicen, non-communicative diseases and chronic illnesses. The big one is, para los que conocen, diabetes, o siempre me duele la barriga after I eat. It may not be the food, or actually, it may be the food, but not in the way that you think. Today's conveniences come con chingaderas that we don't even know what's in them. They make them taste good, but in reality, they don't nourish what we need. No nos dan lo que la barriga necesita. It's actually taking stuff away from it. So I think the disconnect here is that colonization and industrialization have prevented us from finding those natural remedies that many of us need today, or many of us are even becoming more and more aware of, pero a un costo más caro, in the sense that not only is it a social cost because it's affecting our health, but going back to the primitive, o sea, maneras de la pobreza, is now and economically even more expensive than ever. Go figure. So, how do we go back to these primitive, o sea, ways of living, of finding remedies at a not so poor price? Think about the act of cooking in tu casa, choosing to spend that hour to chop vegetables, cook them down, instead of pasando los 5 minutos in the drive-thru, maybe 35 if you go to In-N-Out, and then they give you the wrong order. So that becomes that act of resistencia, resilience, something that many of us need or have to go through today. Think about it when you go back to utilizing esa cuchara de palo that's been in your family since the days of Pancho Villa. It's that gateway into finding that reconnection, that sense of place, and that resilience or resistance to suppress and forget or let go of the heritage, of not only food, but the culture that shapes each and every one of us today. So I guess what I'm getting at is this hyper connectivity, hyper convenience que tenemos hoy en día with the endless apps, delivery apps, shouldn't come at the cost of where our food comes from, what culture we want to preserve to represent ourselves and our community. Sure, cocinando en un microwave is much more convenient, or swinging by that drive-through. They're useless calories. Essentially, traditional ways of cooking are not just calories, but they're calories that are built on stories, traditions, layers of nourishment and love. It's what will keep that sense of place, topophilia. It'll give you that sense of when somebody cuts open a mango, it's going to remind you to go a la vuelta de la esquina for vaso de fruta. So how do we regenerate the roots of our past today and seed what we can eat for the future? And many of us, come from first generation families of immigrants, migrants, segundos or terceros. And again, going back to this whole thing that growing up you didn't hear about nutrient dense foods, right? Hoy en día hablamos de sustentabilidad, about circular economy, zero waste. Y, like I ser sincero, growing up, that was just part of life. That was part of survival. Nothing fancy, just simple and straightforward. Common sense. So if you sit back and think about it for a second, the ways of the past, the ways, the ancestral ways of producing food have been circular, just like the calendario azteca. Nuevas palabras, it was just called living consciously, living responsibly. But today we hear about food with nose to tail or root to stem cooking. But in los días del pasado, that was no trend. You didn't see that shit going through TikTok. En la casa no se desperdiciaba nada. You used the bones, those huesos to make stocks, caldos, sopas. La piel to make chicharrón. Los intestinos, los órganos to make menudo. Everything had a purpose. Everything offered a special flavor. And even today holds un rinconcito especial in your heart, not to mention the nutrients that it had to offer. We hear about composting and reseeding. I'm talking about seeding today. But when people frowned upon eating and saving the seeds para la cosecha del próximo año, that primitive term is what we call regenerative agriculture today. Sounds pretty fancy, but at the end of the day, it's common sense. Simple. It's a measure of survival, of resilience. Think about it. It's that act of sovereignty, ensuring that you have food, food security for next year's harvest, or even just for the future. It's giving you that sense of comfort, empowerment, that you don't need to rely on a future of DoorDash notifications o simplemente esa bolsa de tatakis. But what about community? For many of us, o sea, vosotros, familia, community is a way of life. Y what speaks more than community than el recalentado? Recalentado brings community together, and it's not just to come and have the leftovers para que no se desperdicie nada, but it's about bringing us to weave that social connection, gratification for one another, bridging connection, regardless of who takes that seat at the table. So next time you hear that saying in tu casa de Come, porque en esta casa no se tira nada. So food can't be wasted, right? Not only is that a household rule, but it brings back wisdom, knowledge, respect. That household rule has this unspoken wisdom rooted in tradition, as well as respecting the labor, respecting the ground that your food came from. At the end of the day, we can't forget Dar de la Chancla. So I think we don't need some fancy certification to validate the sabiduría that we already knew. If you describe sustainability to one of your elders, los abuelos, great grandfathers, or even your parents, if you're first generation, don't be surprised when they turn around and look at you all raro and be like, "Qué pendejo." It's just how you live. The sustainability isn't for those just connected to our roots and culture. It's nothing new. Now, if you feel disconnected, if you feel astray, where do you start? Start by planting some culantro or yerba buena in a pot on your windowsill. That manzanilla. Save all the scraps of your vegetables. Make that rich caldo. Here's a good one. Learn to make una de esas recetas that your family has made for generations. And it's one that you won't find on YouTube, TikTok. It's one that reclaims you to your identity. And I'm talking about those recetas that where people tell you, hey, échale un puño de esto y un toque de aquello. Until it just feels right. At the end of the day, our future is cooked with the ancestral wisdom in simple ways. And it's what some chefs today would say, we cook from the heart, y sin recetas. So next time you're out, your favorite fast food place or even fine dining, or hey, at the next family gathering, lo que sea, and the word authentic, it's utilized. Pregúntate, what does that even mean? Or how authentic is it? Is it authentic to where you came from? Is it authentic to the food? Is it authentic to the recipe in that family's tradition? Or has this authenticity been diluted and dressed up so much for the viral videos, social media, the likes and the shares? Food is this living archive, un archivo que tiene vida. So when you take a seat at the table, find a way to build that archive. Build an archive that preserves, interprets, shares esas historias of our past so they can inform the palates of the future. Essentially, every time you see that pot of frijoles on the stove, that bowl of ramen steaming in front of you, o esa tortilla on the comal recién hecha, es una historia de migration, a story of resilience, a story that carries cultural beginnings. And that's the way we should continue to cook. It's the way we're going to be able to reconnect to the fundamental properties of our primitive or a lo pobre ways. And these are ways that many will never find in un pinche textbook or even on ChatGPT. Next time you're walking down the callejón, you smell that carbón or esa sandía recién picada. Inhale that aroma and just take a minute and ground yourself. And how the roots of our food and culture still nourish and heal us today in ways that modern medicine and convenience and viral trends never will.
Resonated with you. Ya sea una palabra, una idea, un sabor, take it with you. Compártelo en tu próxima comida. And subscribe to follow us on your favorite podcast platform, ya sea video or audio. Aquí no se trata de ser perfectos, se trata de ser conscientes y dejar que nuestras decisiones hablen con sabor y propósito. We'll see you on the next ramble.